Picture this. London, late 1016. The air tastes like smoke and wet wool. A tired man with cracked hands pushes through a crowd near the river, clutching a small leather pouch. Inside it a few clipped pennies, a scrap of bread, and the habit of flinching every time he hears the wrong accent. He has lived through too many kings. He has watched men swear loyalty, then swear the opposite, then swear they never swore at all. He looks up at the walls and sees the same thing everyone sees, not banners, not glory, but the math of survival. Food in, swords out, and then the brutal turn, the kind that makes your stomach drop because it is so ordinary. A new name starts moving through the city like a cold draft, whispered first, then spoken aloud, then carved into people's plans. Cnut, not a legend, not a horned helmet, a ruler with ships, patience, and time. This isn't a movie. This is what happens when exhaustion becomes a weapon. This isn't a story about a conquest. It's a story about control, about how England, already bleeding, became a board full of desperate pieces, and how one man learned to win by making his enemies choose the shape of their own surrender. If you stay with me, you're going to see the dirty mechanics, the bargains made in candlelit rooms, the fear that sits behind peace, and the way a crown can be won in battle, but kept only through administration, punishment, and a steady hand on the throat. And real quick, if you like history that treats people like people, not like trivia cards, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, city and country. I always want to know how far these old stories travel. By the time Nut steps into the story as more than a name, England is already hollowed out, not just from raids, but from years of uncertainty that makes every harvest feel temporary. Vikings have been coming and going for generations, but the early 1000s hit different. The pressure is constant. The coast is a bruise that keeps getting punched. The kings keep paying, then fighting, then paying again. Danegeld becomes a word that tastes like humiliation, a tax that tells you are not in control of your own borders. Every payment says, we cannot stop them. And every time the money runs out, the ships come back, because why wouldn't they? If you learn that a kingdom will buy peace, you keep selling it. The mood in England is not heroic. It is suspicious. It is tired. It is nobles watching other nobles, wondering who is already talking to the enemy. It is townspeople looking at the sea and counting how many days until the next bad sail appears on the horizon. It is a country with institutions, law, landholding, and a church that records and remembers, and those things do not vanish when fear arrives. They just get used by whoever has the knife. Æthelred, the king people later nicknamed the Unready, does not rule in a vacuum. He rules in a storm. He makes choices that seem, from the outside, like flailing. Some of them are brutal. The massacre of Danes in England on St. Brice's Day in 1002 is one of those moments that tells you what panic looks like when it wears a crown. It is remembered because it is both policy and violence, fear turned into an order, and orders like that do not disappear. They come back around. They become reasons. They become propaganda. They become fuel. Then comes the moment that turns the crisis into a true power vacuum. In 1013, Swene Forkbeard, King of Denmark, pushes in hard and actually takes England. Æthelred flees. The strong hand becomes acceptable because the alternative looks like endless bleeding. Swene dies quickly, early 1014, and suddenly the board flips again. Æthelred comes back, and Sweyn's son, Nut, is left with an army that expected a kingdom and is now staring at the sea again. Here is your first correction moment, because pop culture likes Vikings as noise, as chaos, as a storm that hits and leaves. That image is incomplete. The raids were real, the violence was real, but the long game was always there too. A fleet that can appear on any coast is not just a weapon, it's an economy. It's logistics. It's supply lines that move on water. It's a bargaining chip that says, you will negotiate with me because I can return faster than you can recover. The difference with Canute is not that he invents strategy. The difference is that he learns how to fuse that strategy with administration, with legitimacy, with the machinery of a kingdom that already exists. Canute does not arrive as a person you get to know. He arrives as a problem. His name means ships you cannot outrun. It means an army you cannot exhaust by waiting, because it can feed itself from the sea and move when it wants. It means your rivals at court might decide that surrender is safer than loyalty. and it means that every deal you make with him will be enforced by the fact that he can come back and punish you if you break it. In 1015, he returns with a serious force. The numbers in the sources are debated, and later writers love to inflate fleets because big numbers feel like destiny. But the point is not the exact count of ships. The point is that this is not a raid. This is a campaign built to stay. England responds with what it has, which is not just soldiers but politics, because England's problem is that every military choice is tangled with suspicion. Who will show up? Who will betray whom? Who will arrive late on purpose? Edmund Ironside, Æthelred's son, emerges as the man willing to fight when the kingdom needs it. His nickname is not subtle. He is framed as hard, stubborn, a kind of resistance England can cling to. But resistance still has to eat. It still has to move. It still has to keep men together when fear and hunger are chewing at them. And Cnut is patient. Patient in a way that is easy to mistake for weakness, until you realise he is simply letting England burn itself out. The year 1016 becomes the hinge. It is a year of movement, of battles and marches and siege pressure, and it is messy. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle gives you the rhythm of it, but not the kind of clean choreography people want. You can feel the churn. You can feel the country being squeezed between two claims to authority, and the ordinary people caught under it, the ones who do not choose kings but pay for them. London matters here. London is not just a city, it is a symbol and a storehouse, and a choke point. Control London, and you control a major centre of money, trade and legitimacy. The city resists Cnut's pressure more than once. There are sieges and countermarches and the kind of grinding strain that turns hunger into policy. And somewhere in this struggle, there is a story, often told later, about ships being dragged and a canal being cut to bypass London Bridge. The sources are not unanimous, and some versions attach that stunt to other Scandinavian leaders. So treat it like what it probably is, a legend shaped around a real strategic truth. London was hard to take. Rivers and bridges mattered. Mobility mattered. Whether or not anyone literally carved a canal the way the story says, the fact remains that controlling movement on water was part of how these wars were fought. What changes in a room when the winner is decided is not fireworks. It is silence. It is the way men stop volunteering opinions and start watching each other's faces. It is the way a messenger becomes the most important person in England for 5 minutes because he carries the next order. It is the way a noble who was loud yesterday becomes careful today because the penalty for guessing wrong is no longer social, it's physical. The key turning point is the Battle of Assendun, usually placed in the late 1016. Details are contested, and medieval battle narratives tend to be thin on the exact mechanics, but it is widely treated as the decisive clash where Edmund's side suffers a major defeat. And this is where the human ugliness comes into view, not in cinematic hero shots, but in the reality that battles like this are confusion, shouting through helmet slits, mud that clings, men slipping, lines collapsing when someone panics, and the sickening moment you realise the man next to you is not moving anymore, and you cannot stop to mourn because the next blow is already coming. In the aftermath, the politics harden. Edmund and Cnut reach an agreement to divide the kingdom, with Edmund holding Wessex and Cnut holding the rest. This is not mercy, this is management. It's two men recognising that the war is consuming the thing they both want to rule, and then Edmund dies soon after, by late 1016. This is one of those moments where the sources are frustrating. Some later traditions whisper assassination, some hint at betrayal, some suggest illness. Sources differ, and we should not pretend certainty where the record is thin. What matters is the effect. The agreement becomes irrelevant. The board clears, and Cnut becomes king of all England. Now the conquest story, the version people like, would end here, with a crown placed on a head and a foreign army settling down. But that is the easy part. Governing is where the violence changes shape. The sword becomes an appointment. The raid becomes a tax. The victory becomes paperwork that decides who gets to live in peace and who gets to be an example. Cnut's first moves are not the moves of a man trying to look like a lovable outsider. They are the moves of someone tightening control. He has to solve a simple, brutal problem. He has an army. Armies expect payment. Armies without payment become a problem. He cannot just keep tens of thousands of armed men sitting on English soil waiting for gratitude, so he pays them. In 1018, there is a massive Danegeld raised, widely recorded as an enormous sum, used to pay off much of the fleet. Again, specific totals appear in sources, but the larger truth is enough to make your teeth clench. The peace begins with a gigantic extraction of wealth. Stability is purchased, and the receipt is written in silver, and then come the punishments. Cnut has to neutralise rivals and signal that the rules are different now. Edric Strenna, the ealdorman whose reputation for shifting loyalties makes him infamous, is executed. That is not a myth. It fits the logic of a new ruler. Men like Edric are useful until they are not. A man who betrays everyone is not a tool, he is a warning sign. Cnut also eliminates or sidelines other potential claimants and threats. Some are killed, some are exiled, some are stripped of power. The exact chain of events can be complex, but the pattern is clear. He is cleaning the board. Not for justice, for control. This is the game beginning, and it is not a game in the playful sense. It is a noose that tightens slowly enough that people tell themselves they can breathe. He begins to reward obedience and punish pride. He keeps English institutions in place instead of smashing them, because smashing them would create chaos, and chaos is expensive. He uses them. He issues charters. He works with the church. He understands that legitimacy in England is not just held by swords, it is held by ritual, by oaths, by the memory of law, by the blessing of bishops, by the image of a king who protects rather than merely takes. And here is your second correction moment, because people imagine Vikings as a purely destructive force. Cnut is what happens when that force learns administration. He does not stop being capable of violence. He becomes capable of controlled violence, which is worse in its own way because it can be calibrated. He can choose exactly how much pain to apply to make a point, and where to apply it so the message travels. One of his most important moves is his marriage to Emma of Normandy in 1017. This is not romance. This is architecture. Emma is the widow of Æthelred, tied to the old royal line, connected to continental power networks, and valuable in the eyes of the church and the elites. By marrying her, Cnut doesn't just take a throne, he borrows legitimacy. He makes it harder for English nobles to pretend he is a temporary occupier. He puts a queen beside him who represents continuity, even if that continuity is stitched together with fear and politics. Cnut also makes choices about governance that show he is building a system. He divides England into large earldoms and places powerful men in charge, men who owe their status to him. Over time, figures like Godwin rise in this world, an English earl who becomes hugely influential, a man whose family will later shape the fate of the kingdom. The point is not that Cnut invents the English nobility. The point is that he reshapes it, and by reshaping it, he turns potential enemies into stakeholders. If their land and power depend on his stability, they will defend his stability, even if they dislike him. Imagine being one of those elites, an ealdorman, a thesn, a bishop. You have spent years watching kings fall. You have seen what happens when a ruler cannot protect you, the raids, the burnings, the ransom payments. You have also seen what happens when you back the wrong horse, your land seized, your family endangered, your name erased from future favours. Now this new ruler offers something simple. Obey, and you get peace and position. Resist, and you become a lesson. Pride starts to feel like an expensive hobby. Control also lives in the sea lanes, and this is where Cnut's background becomes more than flavour. England is an island, and islands do not get conquered the way inland kingdoms do. Ships are the arteries. Whoever controls the water controls the speed of war and the speed of punishment. A ruler with fleets can move men faster than messengers can run. He can appear at a coast where rebellion is brewing. He can keep trade flowing when it benefits him. He can choke it when it doesn't. The sea becomes a highway for authority. Cnut's advantage is not just the ability to fight. It is the ability to mobilize. Logistics is the unromantic engine that makes control real. Food, pay, ships repaired, ports secured. Local leaders reminded in person that the king can show up. A kingdom can survive a battle loss if it has institutions. It cannot survive repeated logistical collapse. Cnut keeps the machine running, and he does it by making the English system serve him while keeping enough Scandinavian muscle nearby to discourage romantic rebellion. And then the scale widens. People call it the North Sea Empire, and you should picture what that means without getting lost in a list of dates. England is not just ruled by a king who comes from Denmark. England becomes part of a larger orbit of power across the sea. Denmark matters. Norway matters. The routes between them matter. The feeling on the ground in England is that your king is not only an English king, and that can cut two ways. It can mean less attention. It can mean more resources. It can mean that you're now a wealthy piece of a bigger puzzle. In 1019, Cnut becomes king of Denmark as well, after the death of his brother Harold, according to most reconstructions. This is not a side quest. This is central to the control story. If he leaves Denmark weak, enemies can use it against him. If he ignores England, England can rebel. So he does what effective rulers do. He delegates. He appoints regents. He relies on trusted men. He turns the realm into something that can run without him in the room, because the room is now multiple rooms. This is where moral complexity thickens, because the stability England experiences under Canute is real enough that even hostile sources cannot deny the quiet that settles in compared to the chaos of the previous years. Trade can breathe. The church receives patronage. Laws are affirmed. Some sources present him as a ruler who respects the old ways, at least in public. But what is that stability built on? Taxes that fund a standing force, sometimes described through systems like the Danegeld, the memory of executions, the knowledge that the king has ships and can return quickly. Stability purchased, and someone always pays. Imagine being a farmer inland, far from the coast. You might hate the taxes. You might resent the foreignness of the court. But you might also be grateful that this year, no longships come up the river to burn your barns. You might be relieved that the local lord is no longer dragging men away every season for a new emergency levy. Peace is not a moral triumph. It is a condition, and conditions can be bought. Cnut also leans into the church in a way that signals calculation and belief can overlap. Medieval rulers rarely separate politics and piety the way modern people want them to, supporting monasteries, honouring saints, showing humility in the right moments. These are acts of legitimacy. They are also sometimes acts of genuine devotion. Cnut's famous pilgrimage to Rome in 1027, tied to the imperial coronation of Conrad II, is a moment that shows him presenting himself as a European ruler, not a pirate with a crown. He writes letters, he speaks about reducing unjust tolls, he positions himself as protector and participant in a broader Christian order. It is image-making, but it is also governance. Because image, in a medieval kingdom, is part of the infrastructure. Now about the story everyone knows, the one where King Canute commands the tide to stop. Treat it carefully. The version most people repeat comes from much later writers, and it functions like a moral anecdote. The point is not that he thought he could control the ocean. The point is that he was demonstrating the limits of kingly power, humbling flatterers who told him he was unstoppable. Whether it happened exactly as described is uncertain. But the fact that it became the story attached to his name tells you something. Even centuries later, people remembered him as a man associated with control, and the lesson they wanted to pin on him was about where control ends. And yet, for all his administrative competence, his rule is not a clean moral victory. Cnut's empire reaches into Norway, and Norway does not submit because it is inspired. It submits because power is applied. In 1028, Cnut takes Norway, pushing out Olaf Haraldsson, later St. Olaf, a figure wrapped in both politics and sanctity. The details of Norway's internal conflicts are tangled, and the sagas and chronicles have their own agendas, so again, caution matters. But the broad shape is clear. Cnut expands, and expansion always means someone loses autonomy. It means local elites choosing between resistance and accommodation. It means the threat of force hovering behind every agreement. Canute installs governance that relies on representatives, including Ealgifu and his son by her Harald Harefoot, in some accounts of Norwegian administration, and that rule becomes unpopular. The sources emphasize resentment, taxes, foreign oversight, cultural friction, the kind of rule that looks stable on paper and feels like humiliation on the ground. Control can hold, but it also leaves bruises that do not fade just because the violence becomes bureaucratic. Back in England, the court is not a Viking drinking hall. It is a machine of favours, confiscations, marriages, church support, law codes, coinage, and public performance. Cnut issues law codes that echo earlier English legal tradition, presenting himself as a guardian of order. That does not make him gentle, it makes him smart. A ruler who frames his power as continuity reduces the moral oxygen available to rebels. If he can say, "I am restoring the law," then anyone who opposes him can be painted as opposing order itself. And all the while the sea remains his silent ally. Sea lanes let him move between realms. They let him project the sense that he is everywhere even when he is not. They let him punish quickly. They let him reward quickly too. A shipment, a visit, a gift, a threat. In a world where most people travel at the speed of feet and horses, ships are a strategic cheat code. And Cnut plays it like someone who understands that distance is not just geography, it's time, and time is power. The ugliness of victory shows up in smaller ways too. In the way hostages are used as insurance, in the way noble families become political tools, in the way peace can mean your village is not burned but your surplus is taken, in the way legal language can hide coercion. Conquest is loud. Governing can be quiet, and quiet can be just as cruel, because it normalizes what used to shock. There is also the question of identity, because Cnut is often portrayed as a Danish king sitting on an English throne. But over time, the line blurs. His court includes Englishmen and Scandinavians. He adopts English titles and practices. He presents himself as a Christian king. He needs England's wealth and stability, and England needs a ruler who can keep the sea wolves from returning, even if that ruler is one of them. Control works best when it stops looking like occupation and starts looking like how things are. Imagine being a young Then who comes of age under Cnut. You might not remember an England without fear. You might see this king as the one who made the roads safer, the coasts quieter, the politics less suicidal. Your loyalty might be practical. You might not care where his father was born. You care whether your land survives. That is how regimes become normal, not through belief, through habit. But even habit has cracks. The North Sea Empire depends heavily on one man's ability to hold multiple worlds together. It depends on his personal authority, his network, his reputation, his ability to punish and reward. It is durable while he is alive and active. When he dies, the question becomes sharp and ugly. Was it a system, or was it a man? Cnut dies in 1035. The succession that follows is not the clean passing of a stable bureaucracy. It becomes contested, with his sons, Harold Harefoot and Harthacnut, tied to different mothers and different power bases. Emma's position becomes politically dangerous. England's elite begins recalculating again, just like they did before. The board starts shifting. Control that looked permanent begins to look personal, and personal control dies with the person. And this is the moral hangover that should sit in your chest at the end of the story. Cnut brings stability, yes, but stability is purchased. Who pays? The people who get taxed into silence, the rivals who get executed to send a message, the regions absorbed into a larger empire that did not ask permission, the church that gains patronage but also becomes part of the crown's legitimacy machine, the elites who survive by bending and then later tell themselves they always stood tall. If you want the sharp idea, here it is. Conquest is easy compared to governing, and governing is the real violence because it decides what becomes normal. Cnut did not just win England with ships and steel. He won it by learning how to make fear productive, how to turn exhaustion into compliance, how to take a country that had been bleeding and offer it a bargain, safety in exchange for control, order in exchange for pride, peace in exchange for silver. Remember that man in London with the clipped pennies in the pouch. Imagine him years later, older, shoulders bent, hearing that the king has gone and feeling the old dread crawl back up his spine. Because once you have lived through the churn of rulers, you learn something bitter. The crown is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the quiet calculations, the wax seal, the tax roll, the appointment letter, the order spoken softly so it sounds reasonable, right up until it ruins someone's life. And if this story leaves you with that uneasy question, what does a good ruler look like when good is built on punishment, then you're exactly where I want you. Next, we follow the consequences, the way England's elites keep learning the wrong lesson from each crisis, until another claimant crosses the sea and control changes hands again, with a different accent, a different set of promises, and the same ugly math underneath.